Hello everyone. Today we are replacing the carburetor pump diaphragm and gasket on this Briggs & Stratton 550 series gas motor. This is a 4-cycle gas motor that has what's called the Pulsa Prime carburetor, in which there is no float bowl. We have the fuel tank. This is a primer bulb. Carburetor sits right behind it. Air filter on top. So similar to a 2-cycle motor, we have a diaphragm assembly. You can just about see, there we go, a little bit more light. We can just about see the diaphragm portion of this. And here's our gasket. This is the part number we'll be using today. I was able to buy this on Amazon for relatively inexpensive. So we're going to start by removing the air filter and then removing the fuel tank carburetor assembly from the motor, starting with the air filter. Okay, the air filter is off. Here's our throttle control. It basically works in high or low mode. This should be our governor linkage. The carburetor to crankcase vent is here, and carburetor to intake is back here. This would be a cross tube, goes across to an intake on the other side. That is a part that comes up very often for needing to be replaced, but I don't believe this needs replacement. My problem with this unit is that I get about halfway through the fuel tank and it stops pumping fuel. So I think the pump's gone bad or the gasket's gone bad, hence needing the replacement. So we have 2 fasteners to remove, and we have to undo the governor linkage and the throttle linkage. The governor linkage is a lot harder than the throttle linkage. Our screws are going to be back here. That goes into the engine block. And then this screw up here, which the bracket here is on the face, and that screws into the tank. So we'll remove those 2 and then get our tank and carburetor assembly out of the way. So at this point, getting this governor linkage off is a real bear. So I've got everything removed. I'm just going to pull the assembly off that tube on the back of the carburetor. There you can see it. And then basically you have to take the tank up and gently rotate to get the linkage off, kind of moving the linkage out of the way. Now, the most important thing about this entire assembly, the tank is metal, the entire carburetor is plastic, with a couple of plastic and brass line jets. So you got to be really careful when removing this, or else you'll shatter the carburetor and that's the end of it. This is about the position I have the assembly in to remove it from that governor linkage. Pull that off. You can see here's the S-turn on that governor linkage. Here's that cross tube going to the inlet. And here's our crankcase vent. All right, we can see on the top of the carburetor, we have 5 Phillips number 2 screws, and that holds our carburetor in place to the tank with the gasket and diaphragm assembly. So we're going to take those off and then separate the 2 sections. All right, with the screws removed, we're going to separate the carburetor assembly, and it has a pickup tube and another screen. Both of these items should be cleaned, but I'm very cautious about doing it with carburetor cleaner because this is all plastic. So you have a little gasket from the air filter, fitting ferrule and gasket for going to that cross tube. And here's our assembly. Looks like it's shot, so we'll be changing it. To put a little bit more perspective in this, this is the machine top of that metal fuel tank that acts kind of as what would normally be the second half of a carburetor. So you can see where our air chambers are, see where a couple of our vent points are, and our fluid passageways. All right, so I've wiped down everything, and I've made sure all the fluid passageways are clear. I use a welder's tip cleaner very gently in these passageways to get any big stuff out. I would normally do that before blowing air through, which you could do with this. We're using carburetor cleaner, which also could be done with this. Just this metal side, I really wouldn't do with this plastic carburetor housing. So we have the filter, which can pop off and be cleaned, and the diaphragm, which goes against the tank. And then we should have the filter, the washer assembly, the fiber washer, that'll go between the pump diaphragm and the carburetor body. So those we could actually put down first on the carburetor. Dry that up a little bit. Make sure everything lines up. See that little vent point? That's where our diaphragm is. And we have a couple of check valve points on that diaphragm and our fluid passageways. So then we will put our gasket down on top of that. And the plus side here is that everything lines up. So on the back of the carburetor, the bottom of the carburetor, I pulled the gasket off. You see we have a little spring in here. So use caution to not lose that spring. Alright, so everything looks pretty good. I don't have any junk clogging any filters. Everything's looking good. Took it off, checked it behind it. Everything's okay. So we're going to go back for reassembly. So that spring has a little bit of tension held onto the stem it's sitting on. So we'll see if we can turn it upside down. See, our pickup tube will go in. Line up everything. Sorry, nice and gently. Then we're going to put the screws in. Now, because there are 5 screws here, when you start to turn down pressure on them and tighten them up, you want to make sure it's even and not excessive to crack the carburetor body, because a cracked carburetor body won't get a good seal. So we're going to use caution with that. There is a tightening pattern. I'm going to relate it to basically a crossbolt pattern on a set of lug nuts on a wheel or a pulley or anything. So we'll use that. All right, we've got our screws tightened down firmly. No excessive tightness, no gaps. We're in good shape. So, installation is reverse of disassembly. Now we've got the governor linkage lined up. And just kind of get it in there. Going to line up the carburetor with the intake line. The intake hole. Which is a little bit tricky. Don't want to break anything. Alright, everything's lined up. Crankcase vents lined up. We'll get our throttle linkage in place, screws back in place, air filter back in place, and give it a try. One thing that bears mentioning here, the throttle gate. Typically you find some models have multiple holes and multiple sizes on it so they can adapt it for whatever assembly is necessary. In this particular carburetor, there's only 2 holes. The larger one is for the governor linkage, and the smaller one is for the throttle spring. Alright, so I'm going to test it without the carburetor filter in place, but this is essentially how it's done. Hope this helps, everyone. Good luck.